All right, we're on.
Boom, we're live.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. I'm Chaplain Gareth Bryant,
Hey there, and I'm James.
Dr. James Ferguson.
So we're here to talk about bioethics from an Islamic perspective. That always involves medical healthcare questions, different ethical decisions. Just to introduce ourselves quick here, I'm a board-certified doctor in family medicine, and Gareth here is a chaplain.
Chaplain, yep.
Great. Okay, I'm sure you guys have seen this before previously, but just want to put a disclaimer that neither of us are scholars, and neither of us has any jobs, so please don't take what we say as formal fatwas or rulings. Please ask your local scholars or ask your local doctor. Don't hit start yet, man. If you hit publish now, it starts quick questions, and then it closes the results.
Oops.
We'll come back to that.
Yeah, we'll get back to that. All right.
All right.
Yeah, so none of us are religio-scholastic experts. We're just disseminating information based on the skills that Allah has allowed us to amass. And any and all questions like this after this live, feel free to contact your religio-scholastic experts and or medical professionals.
Mm-hmm. All right, so let's talk about today's topic. We were talking a bit before, we previewed a little bit before about surrogacy and adoption. Just want to toss out some quick adoption statistics. If anyone's having trouble hearing us, please let us know in the comments. So in the U.S., there's about 1.5 million adopted children in the U.S. right now.
Wow.
Every year, about 135,000 children are adopted.
Wow, that's a lot.
And right now, about 428,000 kids are in foster care on any given day. About half of them are over 6 years old.
Wow.
So males outnumber females, and African American children are disproportionately higher representation than the average population. Now, most kids, more than 60% of children in foster care spend about 2 to 5 years waiting before they can get adopted.
Oh, wow, that's a long time.
Yeah, and some never do get adopted. That's the problem.
Right.
The average age of kids waiting right now for a family to adopt them is 8 years old. That's the average.
Up to 8 years old?
So kids wait 2 to 5 years on average. So the average age of a kid right now waiting for adoption is 8.
That's a long time to be in the system.
Yeah.
That's a very, very long time. That's too long to be in the system, man.
Okay, yeah.
Honestly. That's crazy.
Right? So, okay, although only about 2% of Americans have actually adopted a kid.
Only 2%?
Yeah, but about 1 out of 3 people have said they talked about it or thought it over or at least considered it. About 100 million Americans, about 1 in 3, have an adopted family member in their immediate family.
Okay, I got you.
And 6 out of 10 Americans have some sort of personal experience with adoption.
Mm-hmm.
And 7 million Americans say they were adopted.
Okay.
So in comparison, every year is about 1.3 million abortions.
Right.
And only about 4% of women who have unwanted pregnancies actually go through giving up for adoption.
Right.
So as a result, we have a lot. It's not a lot of statistics on how many people are waiting to adopt right now. It's not about wait list.
Right.
But experts say about 1 to 2 million couples right now are on some sort of wait list to adopt a kid.
Okay.
To adopt.
Okay.
And about most of them are open adoptions, meaning it's just like it's random. It's not like someone who's going to get pregnant and then later on.
Well, I mean that goes into surrogacy.
Right.
Right.
So that's our second sort of connection here.
Right.
So first, let's talk about
because surrogacy and adoption are almost two sides of the same coin.
Yeah. So just to think of it that way, because surrogacy is considered like an infertility treatment. Infertility is
what's the biomedical definition of surrogacy? So or is there a terminology, or like in other words, like is surrogacy just some universally accepted term, or is there a very specific, generic, understood medical terminology for surrogacy?
Right. So
or is it defined?
Yeah. So surrogacy is kind of a legal thing, but it's sort of both here. So from a legal term, it's any arrangement where a woman agrees to get pregnant and again give birth to a child who's going to go to someone else.
Right.
So that's the definition of surrogacy. And then the other person's going to become the new parent, and you give up all your parent rights.
Right.
That's the idea of surrogacy.
Okay.
People do that because if it's impossible to get pregnant, or it's really risky to get pregnant if they have some sort of condition where it'd be dangerous for them to get pregnant.
Right.
People do that. Or if a single person, like a single man, wants to have a kid but doesn't have a couple who can do it. So they can, or same-sex couples as well. If people want to have a kid, but they can't legally, or biologically can't
right.
pull it off.
Right.
So that's a surrogacy idea. And usually people do this for money, although in some places it's banned. You can't do it for money. Like New York State, you can't make a contract where you're going to do that. It's not allowed to do it for money. You can altruistically, like, you can't get pregnant, you can't have a kid. I heard about that. I'm going to...
You mean as a form of a sadaqa, as a form of philanthropy or charity?
Yes, you can do that. And in legal terms, you can do that. And there are agencies that do that as well. Now, from a medical standpoint, there's two kinds of surrogacy. There's natural, where you either use the surrogate's egg and the donor person's sperm,
Right.
Or you do a full surrogacy where you can get the egg from the intended mother and the sperm from the intended father, and you in vitro fertilize and put it into a surrogate's uterus.
Okay.
So it's a full surrogacy where, like, the person who's pregnant has no genetic connection at all. But that's hard to do because sometimes if the man has no sperm, if the woman has no egg, then that doesn't always work. So a natural one is you're using the surrogate's own eggs. So the baby's going to be halfway related to the mother, the surrogate mother.
Anyway, right.
And the parents who are taking the baby at the end, they may only have half the genetic relationship. So it's almost like a half child,
Right.
in that way. That's in terms of genetics. I mean, obviously they'll love them the same way,
Right.
and it's an adopted baby.
Ideally, anyway.
Ideally, yeah. So people ask us, it's a kind of pregnancy. It's a kind of reproductive fertilization, infertility treatments, because for many reasons people just can't get pregnant. If it's on the woman's side, it can be egg problems, age-related, not age-related.
Ovulation issues, menstruation issues.
Yeah. It could be problems with the fallopian tubes. That could be because of a past infection.
It could be things like endometriosis.
Endometriosis
Or
can be
endometriosis-like syndromes.
That's a very common reason why people cannot get pregnant. Uterine abnormalities, cervical factors. Infections is a big one because in the past, if you had a series of STDs, it can make you sterile. You can't have kids.
Oh, right. Especially depending on the type of STDs.
Right. So those can cause scarring. It means the egg can't
Speaking
implant.
of, which type of STDs can cause infertility in either a man or a woman? That could potentially lead up to something as necessary as surrogacy.
The most common one is chlamydia, because that
Okay.
can just cause PID and scarring.
What's PID?
Pelvic inflammatory disease.
Okay.
Anything that just causes inflammation and can cause scars on the uterus and the fallopian tubes means the eggs can't get released.
So does PDI only affect women, or does it affect men as well?
Men can get STDs.
I mean, no, I'm talking about PDI specifically. Is that something that's genocentric, or does that affect both men and women?
It affects women more because basically women have more complicated plumbing is the easy way to say it.
Right.
Now, infections. Now, for men can be infertile for other reasons. It could be endocrine problems, any sort of damage to the testicles,
Right.
like trauma is a big one. Any sort of
like testicular contusion, in which the things twist and things like that.
Things like that can definitely all do that.
Right.
Any sort of systemic disorders, testicular defects, transport disorders like low sperm count, motility problems where they just can't swim correctly.
Right.
There's some rare hormone problems, and there's something called idiopathic, which means about 1 or 2 out of 10 people just don't know why. And we've ruled out all the other options. It's just for some reason just can't get pregnant.
Right.
We tell people, people come in very often. How come we can't conceive? We've been trying.
Right.
We say you have to try for at least a year. And then if you cannot still have a baby after a year, then we start doing different kinds of tests.
Right.
Because 9 out of 10 people, if they're trying to have a baby within a year, they will be able to do that.
Yeah, because unfortunately, what ends up happening, especially in our culture, is that a lot of times women are often deemed the reason for the infertility, which is not an honest or accurate posture.
Yeah.
It could often be.
Oh,
The man could be the reason why their infertility is taking place as well.
Totally.
So it's literally kind of like a 50-50. So it's not just or fair to blame one gender over the other as to the infertility issue.
Exactly.
Or it could be that they're both have like legitimate biomedical issues that prevented conception. Or, obviously we know from an Islamic perspective, it could just be that Allah doesn't decree for them to conceive.
Yeah.
It could be nothing wrong with either party. It's just that's just not something that Allah has decreed for them.
Yeah. Infertility is a really unique, I won't say disease, it's a condition. It's a unique condition because it's a couple. It's not a single person has this, it's a couple has this as a problem.
Because, it takes 2 hands to clap.
Exactly. So, we tell people about studies actually show about like, between 12 and 18% of all couples have infertility problems. So it
You
makes
said 10 out of 12?
12 to 18%
12 to 18%.
of all couples have this problem.
That's a significant percentage.
That is. That's why people say, they come in because now we say if you can't conceive after 6 months of regular routine intercourse, and you're still can get pregnant, then we consider that's infertility. We can start from there.
Okay.
So people still get pregnant after that, or we can start saying, hey, we need to start looking at other causes. Now people do come into the clinic and say, I'm having these problems. We do some simple tests. We do STD tests. We do sperm motility tests. We do different sorts of things. After a while,
is sperm motility, is that medical language for sperm count?
Yeah.
Okay.
So there's two kinds. There's sperm count, which means there's enough sperm in the sample, and there's also, are they motility? Can they swim?
Right.
So some people have damaged sperm tails where they just can't swim very far. They can't go very easily. They can still get pregnant. It's just
what can
harder
cause
to do that.
something like that?
We don't actually, some of it's genetic. Genetic can be some of them.
Right.
Some of it's also just trauma or other issues. Hormone problems can mean it's not manufacturing enough.
Could it be lifestyle issues in terms of substance abuse or things like that?
There is a little bit of connection there, like heavy smokers and stuff like that. It can affect it. And hormone issues is other things. If they try different drugs, other things. It's a lot of different stuff. And to be perfectly honest, if someone comes in with this, I refer them to a specialist.
I mean, you'd have to. Yeah.
You sort of have to. But we can go from there because we could say, okay, we can do in vitro fertilization, meaning if you have a problem, low sperm count, we can harvest an egg from a woman and we can take sperm from a man and we can do in vitro fertilization, which means like basically test tube babies, what we call them.
Right.
We combine them in
How
a test
successful
tube.
are those, by the way?
So we're getting better at it. The problem is they're very expensive. These are expensive treatments. You have to, getting sperm out of a guy is not hard, but getting an egg out of a woman is a surgical operation.
Right.
You have to retrieve these eggs.
Right.
You can get a bunch. And then the problem is they don't always fertilize correctly, meaning like it's not like I just put them in a tray together, they have to work. You have to inject one into the other. And then, so what happens is we can get those, but the problem is they don't implant. So it's not like simple as if, like I said, a lot of conceptions don't end in pregnancy because the egg doesn't implant into the uterus.
Well, what you just mentioned, what's the difference biomedically? What's the difference between conception and pregnancy?
So, conception is what we describe it as like when the egg becomes fertilized.
Right.
It's now multiplying. And It's now
expanding.
Now people don't call that a baby yet because because it depends on who you ask when life begins.
Right.
But the fertilized egg becomes a zygote. It becomes these multiple small cells. It's become this small called a morula, which is basically like a raspberry.
Right.
It's like a bunch of small cells, and it's moving down the fallopian tube, and then it implants into the uterus. Eventually, once it sticks to the uterus, it starts multiplying and starts attaching itself, and then it becomes a placenta and becomes a full sac with a fetus inside, and that's to grow over time. In reality, I'd say more often than not, they do not implant. Okay. So that's why you have to try more. You try so many times.
And like you said, it's very dangerous for the woman, especially.
Yeah, pregnancies are not risk-free.
And then it's costly as well.
It's costly. Yeah. So what they'll wind up doing is, because we don't know if they're going to implant correctly, we don't have a surefire way to say, we have a fertilized egg.
And we know for a fact that it's going to happen, right?
We don't know. We can't guarantee it's going to implant on the wall of the uterus. So what we'll do is they will implant several. So they'll get 10 fertilized eggs in a test tube. On a test tube, and we're going to implant all 10 of them into the mother, into the woman.
Okay, what if all of them attach?
Do you remember the Octomom?
Right.
Nadia Suleiman. She had 8. She had octuplets. She had 8.
Right.
She had fertility treatments, and the thing is, these have a low success rate. I can implant 4 or 5 of them, and maybe one might implant, maybe none of them will implant.
Right.
So.
But in her case, all 8.
Yeah. Probably had, I think she maybe had more than 8, but 8 of them stayed.
Right.
And they told her, this is too many, this is dangerous. We need to...
I mean, realistically, she could have died.
She could have died. The problem is, they start crowding each other out. Right. They told her it'd be safe if you abort 2 or 3 of them. That way there's more room for the other babies
to survive.
To survive. She said, no, I insist on doing all of them. So it's rare that the problem is, if you have one baby, they grow 40 weeks, it's filling up the mother.
Right.
There's not a lot of room there. If you have twins, now they have to share the space.
Right.
It's cramped and they can be delivered early because now they're causing problems.
Yeah.
Triplets, quadruplets.
The more complicated.
So she had to be delivered prematurely because they said this is too many.
At what stage of her pregnancy was she forced to have her labor induced? Was she like 6 months, 7 months?
Something like that. She had to go, all the babies had to go to the ICU because they were all premature. The problem is it gets too big, they start causing, you could risk the uterus rupturing. There's many things you can cause a problem with.
Right.
So they had to give a really, really close follow-up. That's a very high-risk pregnancy.
Right.
You know, anything twins, triplets, anything above becomes more and more high risk.
It becomes more complicated.
So, I mean, I do deliver babies, but if you give me twins or triplets...
Have you delivered babies?
Many.
Wow.
But if you start saying, I have twins and triplets, I'm like, you know what, I need to send you to a specialist because this is going to require a lot closer
And it's just
monitoring.
out of your league, right?
It's out of my league. I'm not an obstetrician. I'm a family doctor.
Right.
And I can deliver babies, I can treat children and
But like you
adults.
said, it's not your specialty.
That's something you need a specialist obstetrician for because they can handle more complicated cases. Because then you have a very complicated delivery. What if one baby's coming out, correctly? One of the babies coming out legs first. What if they share a placenta or they're two separate placentas?
Right.
Because if they go into labor, one might cut off the blood supply to the other one. There's a lot of risky things.
Or what if
for
one, may Allah forbid, gets caught up in the umbilical cord?
Yes.
That type of thing.
So these are all risky scenarios. And that's why you want to have a
specialist.
If you came in saying, if you're my patient, you came in, I'm pregnant, and I do an ultrasound, oh, you're having twins. She didn't know she had twins. I'm going to send you to another specialist because this is a little more complicated than I'm comfortable with.
Right.
And if it makes obvious sense.
Right.
So,
No, that's a very necessary and it's a
Yeah.
good breakdown. So in terms of surrogacy, Islamically, surrogacy takes many forms.
right.
Like, I'll give an example. In the Quran specifically, Allah mentions in Surah An-Nisa, the chapter of women, chapter 4, pertaining to the types of women that Muslim men are not allowed to marry. One of the types of women that a Muslim man is not allowed to marry is a woman whom was breastfed by the same person as them.
Okay.
So Islamically, this is a form of surrogacy in terms of surrogate breastfeeding, right?
Yes.
Which is common in many cultures around the world. Like even in the United States, I know people who are Muslim born.
Yeah.
They were breastfed by the same person as someone else's mother.
Yeah.
Like,
This is what they
some-
call
some-
this is a wet nurse.
Wet nurse, right?
Yeah.
But it's a form of surrogacy because Islamically, if you are breastfed by the same person, you're not allowed to marry any of that person's female children. So
see.
Islamically, those are your brothers and sisters.
Okay.
Even if you're not biologically related at all, if you're breastfed by the same person, Islamically, based on our Sharīah, based on Islamic law,
Yeah.
you are blood relatives, Islamically, and you're not allowed to marry those persons. So
okay.
this actually came up during the time of Muhammad, peace be upon him. One of the companions, the woman he was married to, they were breastfed by the same person. And that wet nurse, that surrogate breastfeeder was still alive. And she came to Muhammad, peace be upon him, may Allah be pleased with him. She said, these two people cannot be married because I know for a fact that I breastfed both of them. So Muhammad, peace be upon him, came to this companion and he asked him about this scenario. And out of anger, because he loved this woman he was married to, he said, this person's a liar.
Oh.
He, out of anger, because he didn't want to divorce the woman, because he
Yeah.
knew the truth, but he was denying the truth.
I see.
And then Muhammad, peace be upon him, he looked at him, he said, how can you stay with this person after you know the truth? So out of religio guilt, this person decided to divorce the person because he knew that he was in a mahrum relationship. He was in an Islamically prohibited relationship. Because again, Islamically, you can't marry your sister.
Right.
So Islamically, by virtue of the fact that they were breastfed by the same person, that was his surrogate sister in that regard. So he was not allowed.
Gotcha.
That immediately was cause for annulment of their marriage.
Oh,
So that's one type of surrogacy Islamically.
Mm-hmm.
The other types of surrogacy Islamically are directly related to what you mentioned about someone volunteering themselves to carry a baby for someone else.
Yeah.
And then also on part of the man who would volunteer himself as being the surrogate father, meaning volunteering himself to donate sperm, right? So this idea of being a sperm donor or being an egg donor, this goes directly into what we discussed in episode 2 pertaining to anatomical donations.
Right.
So Islamically, by virtue of what's being donated, this would count as anatomical donation as well.
Yes.
And much like organ donating and like skin graft donating
Yeah.
and blood donating and organ donating and all of that type of stuff, the same rules that apply to organ and blood and all that type of stuff, that would apply to sperm and fallopian egg donation as well. So you have scholars who take these different varied views,
I see.
stating that you're not allowed to do this at all.
I see.
And then some, obviously, they would take the position that you can do it as long as it doesn't necessitate you being dead for it, right?
Okay.
But in this case, in terms of sperm and fallopian egg donation, the strongest and most correct opinion would be the most conservative opinion, is that it's not Islamically allowed at all.
Right.
Because it violates the maqsid, the objective of the preservation of an-nasab, which is patrilineal genealogy. Because Allah says in chapter 33, verse 5, "Ud'u bi abaihim." Allah says, address them via their fathers. So if you have a surrogate, especially if you have a surrogate father, right, who's just being a sperm donor, biologically, this person is obviously not the biological son of the surrogate parent. He's the biological child of the sperm donor. So that's a violation and a breach of the sanctity of an-nasab, of patrilineal
I see.
genealogy. So, in other words, from an Islamic perspective, holistically, principally, sperm donating would be Islamically prohibited. It would be something that is mahrum,
I see.
because it completely disrupts and violates the maqsid, the objective of a Sharīah of Islamic law, which is the preservation of an-nasab, the preservation of patrilineal genealogy.
Okay.
Now, on side of the woman, that takes a little different turn, because Islamically, an-nasab genealogy is not predicated on mother to child. It's
Right.
predicated on father to child.
I see.
Unless the child is illegitimate, meaning if the child is a product of non-marital sexual intercourse, either via fornication or either via adultery or either via rape,
I see.
right? So even in terms of surrogacy, right, you don't necessarily know whether the sperm donor is married or not. So since you don't really know, you would have to assume that the person wouldn't be like illegitimate in that regard, right? So you really wouldn't know realistically whether or not the sperm donor would be a married man or not. But in any case, this would still be a blatant violation of an-nasab, of patrilineal genealogy, Islamically, the preservation of it.
Okay.
Now, again, in terms of a woman donating eggs, that's different, because again, genealogy is not predicated on mother to child; it's predicated on father to child.
I see.
So you would have to use a different precept. You would have to have different rulings pertaining to a woman being allowed Islamically to donate fallopian eggs, or to allow herself to be the vessel for the pregnancy.
Sure. Okay. All right. That's good to know. I just want to zoom out for a bit of a second, because I tried looking up. Well, adoption and surrogacy are a little different, as we talked about before.
Yeah, they're significantly different.
So zoom out for a second. So adoption by itself. I know adoption's a different story, but can adoption be halal?
Yes. In terms of adoption, two things have to be maintained. Number one, if you're an adoptive parent, you have to make sure that as much as humanly possible, obviously, because obviously in some cases this is not the case.
Yeah.
But if you're an adoptive parent, you have to make sure that your adoptive child knows the identity of their biological father. Islamically, they have to know that,
I see.
because again, keeping that information from that child is a gross violation of an-nasab, of the preservation of an-nasab, the preservation of patrilineal genealogy. And again, going back to what Allah says in chapter in chapter 33, verse 5, Allah says, address them via their fathers.
Okay.
So if you know for a fact the identity of an adoptive child's biological father,
Yes.
you're obligated Islamically to inform them of the identity of their biological father.
Okay.
And Islamically, you're obligated to make sure that they have the last name, the surname of their biological father.
Okay. That makes sense.
Yeah.
All right.
Because to not do that, that's a violation of the preservation of an-nasab. It's a violation of the preservation of patrilineal genealogy.
I see. So adopting can be halal, like you said. Would it be halal? Could you put an unwanted child up for adoption?
That's a good question. Obviously, it's better than killing that child.
Right.
Obviously, right? It's better than leaving that child on the street to fend for themselves. Obviously, different people are going to have different opinions. I'm very neutral pertaining to that. As long as the best interest of the child is respected and observed,
Yeah.
I don't have an issue.
Okay. I guess that makes sense. Like we talked about so many other topics on this thing.
Because to be honest, some people don't deserve to be parents.
Yes.
Some people, it's better that they give up their parental rights. Some
Sure.
people are unfit to be parents.
Sure.
That's just reality. It's
Absolutely.
unfortunate, but it's reality.
Yeah.
You know?
I think the answer to so many of our questions on this show is it depends on the...
It's always a case-by-case, touch-and-go basis.
Always a case by case. That makes sense. Okay. So I tried to look up more about, surrogacy, and it really depends on, I try to see what other countries say about it. It depends on state by state. Like, for example, in other states, you can sign a contract and you can actually pay someone to be a surrogate.
Right.
In New York, they do not allow paid surrogacy, but if you want to, donate, you can. That's fine. I tried to look around. Not every country allows this either, because now people are trying to get surrogates from other countries because it's easier or cheaper to do so. There's been a lot of unfortunate Americans who go and get a surrogate mother in Thailand because it's cheaper than paying tens of thousands of dollars to someone here who can do it.
And because they can avoid and evade U.S. law.
This raises so many ethical questions, as you can imagine.
Yeah.
So it's banned. Surrogacy is banned in Pakistan completely. In Saudi, the religious authorities say that it's not allowed, but they recommend fertility treatments instead. Like if you can find a way to get pregnant yourself, do that instead.
I mean, I respect that posture. Me personally, I would much more be privy to trying fertility treatments or adopting.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
Okay. Just to follow up a little before, because I did find out, we talked about, embryo transfers. Between about 20 to 30% of surrogates will successfully get pregnant from this embryo transfer. They try to don't implant the eggs.
What's an embryo transfer again?
Well, we fertilize the egg in let's say a petri dish or a test tube.
Right.
And we try to implant it into the woman.
Okay.
So they don't always take.
Right.
That's why they have like 5 or 6.
Yeah, because sometimes the body rejects it.
Right. So they'll try 5 or 6 eggs. Because at least probably the odds are one of them will transfer successfully, maybe 2.
Right.
So you can either do one at a time, but then it's difficult. It's a procedure to go into the woman's uterus and plant these eggs.
Right.
So we'll try 2 at a time, 3 at a time, 5 at a time to see how many of them will actually implant, and they can go from there. And so of these cases, between 30 and 70% of these surrogate cases actually successfully go all the way through. So often there'll be miscarriages in the beginning, and that's unfortunate. We try to find ways to minimize it, but it's still a complicated. We don't know all the risk factors that cause miscarriage.
It's both complex and complicated.
It is. So it's expensive. It's risky. It's not so much risky to the surrogate mother. The surrogate mother is the one who's carrying the baby.
Right. She's being the vessel.
Yeah.
She's being the facilitator.
Pretty much.
Facilitator. Right.
It's the same risk as anyone getting in vitro fertilization. Anyone who's a test tube baby, it's at the same risk. And they did look at some full research, like, are there any problems? Children born via these methods, there's no increased risk of mental abnormalities, physical abnormalities, compared to regular. However, they do sometimes get preterm labor. They can go into labor earlier.
Okay.
So there's a little risk that way.
Speaking of like the most famous case of like quote unquote the test tube baby, was there a human host for the test tube baby? Like the very first one that they did that was successful?
They've been they tried animal studies first in rhesus monkeys, apes, the things like that, so you can perfect the implantation and fertilization, techniques. This is a technology. The first successful test tube baby,
I think it was in the 80s.
I think it was the 70s or 80s.
Yeah, either 70s or 80s.
And it was around that time.
I think the person is still alive as well.
They are.
Yeah.
So there's really no other difference in between them. You wouldn't know someone's a test tube baby unless they told you.
Right.
It's not
that's why I was asking. Like, did they actually like embryonically develop in a lab, or were they given to someone who volunteered themselves as a surrogate to host the embryology of the child?
So I don't remember the details about this one specifically. I think it was a couple who had fertility problems.
Okay.
For that situation.
Okay.
I don't think the first one was a surrogate per se.
Okay.
But technically, medically, there's no difference really between a natural surrogacy or a full surrogacy. If you're using someone
because it's inherently kind of like the same process is being had.
Pretty much a sperm and an egg, and an egg can go into any uterus and just anyone
realistically,
can get pregnant from it. So it works that way.
Right.
So we were wondering, so fertility treatments. I know Saudi recommends them instead of anything else, but in vitro fertilization is that halal? That's a separate sort of story.
Again, if the in vitro fertilization is something that is between like husband and wife, the couple itself, then absolutely there's nothing Islamically mahrum prohibited about it. It's mahlul, it's Islamically allowable. However, when it comes to what I mentioned about surrogacy, where you're taking the sperm of a man and the egg of a woman who he's not married to, right? Or let's say, for example, if a person is volunteering himself to be the surrogate sperm donor for another person or another married couple, this is Islamically problematic because, again, it disrupts and violates the objective of Islamic law, which is the preservation of patrilineal genealogy.
Sure. All right.
And again, like I said, going back, for a woman to volunteer herself as a surrogate mother or for a woman to volunteer herself to be a fallopian egg donor, that's different because inherently a nasab genealogy is patrilineal and not matrilineal.
I see.
So that's the reason why it's different.
Okay.
So for a man to donate his sperm would be Islamically prohibited, but for a woman to donate either her body to be a host for a surrogate pregnancy or for her to donate her eggs for a surrogate pregnancy, that is not Islamically. That's not mahrum. That's not Islamically prohibited. But for a man to donate his sperm, that's something that's mahrum. That's something that's Islamically prohibited.
Right. Because at the same time, you're expected to do alimony and things like that because you're the father in those situations.
Right. And sometimes I've heard of cases, I think some of them were in the news as well, where a person, he was a sperm donor, and the person who used his sperm literally sued him for child support.
There was a case.
Yeah.
There was a case. So that's a great question because typically when you go to a sperm bank or whatever, there's contracts signed there. It says if I'm donating it, I'm not expected to pay support.
Right.
If I'm accepting this, I'm not going to chase down the original person. There's privacy reasons. They want anonymous donors at sperm banks. So I want everything, all the details.
Right.
There is a because people who need just a person's sperm, there is a large industry where people want to pay extra for what they consider a really good donor.
That's eugenics by definition.
It absolutely is eugenics by definition. People will go to Boston and say, I want to get a sperm donor from someone who went to Harvard. And this is real. They say, I want
this really happens?
People come in and say, I want someone who's got good genes. And so they think someone who's on the sports team. So if you I would never donate sperm, but if you do, they give a full questionnaire. Where'd you go to school? Do you play any sports? Because they want to sell your profile. They're not going to show you, maybe they're going to show your face. So this person donating sperm had brown hair, brown eyes, went to NYU, was a doctor, was on the crew team, and good genes because their family had no history of sickle cell, whatever they say.
Wow.
People actually pay for this. And the sad thing is when I was in college, and my relatives were in medical school, they would actually put ads in the school paper, like, we need sperm donors, we'll pay you, because we need people who clearly, there's a demand for this. I know it's a little silly, but it sounds
a little silly?
Oh, but people really are into this. I'm not going to get some sperm from some guy who lived in the Bronx. I want someone who was clearly a smart person from a really good family.
But I mean, as a human being, as a man, right? Why would you even want to have that as an occupation? It's are you really willing to put that on your resume? That I've been a professional chicken choker for 10 years.
Oh God! Now that's funny you say that because in real life there were some people who paid their college tuition by being a repeat sperm donor. Yeah. Yeah, they were. I don't want to say the tryouts, but people were doing it. They would pay $100 a week for the ones in New York City. Oh yeah,
that's insanity.
If you were at Harvard or Princeton, I'm sure they paid a lot more, but they would pay a lot of money for this. It is crazy.
That's more than crazy.
It's a little bit of designer babies, though. I want
it's eugenics.
I want a donor with blonde hair, blue eyes. What can you give me? Well, this blonde hair, blue eyed guy, he was a surgeon. This blonde hair, blue eyed guy, he was a lawyer. And this one here,
But here's the irony: is that none of that stuff is guaranteed.
It's not. It's not.
Because all of us have the same genes. It's just a matter of certain genes being dormant or recessive versus active and dominant.
Yeah. And are the genes going to express from the mother's side or the father's side?
Yeah.
You don't always know.
Yeah.
Well, I want someone tall. I want a tall kid. Give me a sperm from a tall person who also had brown hair. And people do this.
There's
Now,
absolutely no guarantee that you're going to get that anyway.
so here's where secular medicine has ethical conflicts because who is the
Clearly.
Designer babies, is that eugenics?
That's definitely
It's
eugenics.
definitely eugenics, just extra steps.
Yeah.
Who has do couples have a right to fertility? Because if they can't get pregnant, should government pay for this?
That's another issue as well.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So.
And who has legal rights to children of adoptions and surrogacies? Because there have been, first of all, if surrogacy, let's say people want to donate, their surrogacy services.
Right.
Okay, if this is a social justice, right? Well, is this exploiting poor women who are being paid to have babies for rich families?
Obviously.
Oh yeah, it definitely is.
And we see it actually happening in real time.
It's happening in real time, so the question is, what do you want to do about it?
It's literally happening right now as we speak.
It absolutely is happening. So the question is, so should we say women should not be able to allow New York says no. New York says we're not going to allow this kind of no payments allowed at all.
Right.
And because we want to exploit women. Well, now who suffers here? Like, who's the ethical question? Who's right in this situation? Should we allow payments for voluntary couples, or should we say no? This is exploiting people, even if they say they're not being exploited. Come on.
It is exploitation by definition.
Because this is a sort of sense. This is almost like some people say this is kind of prostitution, really. Because feminists say you're selling your body here. You're turning yourself into just a vessel.
No, it is objectification.
Absolutely.
It really is. Yeah.
And it gets more complicated because then there are some rich couples who are like, look, I want a safe pregnancy. You're not going out, you're not clubbing because you're going to stress the baby out. So I'm going to say you have to stay indoors for 8 months.
So this is kind of like biological slavery.
It can be. I mean, as part of the deal is, like, if you don't get paid, you're not leaving the hotel. Like,
they've actually made movies about that, about like surrogacy, like going horribly wrong, and like it's
so
it really gets crazy like that.
Can we keep them isolated? Like, I don't want you smoking or drinking as part of the contract. You're not getting paid unless you show you're not going to smoke or drink for 9 months.
Right.
But what if can you lock her up? Okay. What about the problem is the baby once it's delivered goes right to the new parents.
Immediately, right?
Immediately. Now this is a problem because, can the surrogate mother see the baby? Oh no, we don't get you to get attached to this new baby, so you're not going to see the baby.
Well, it's going to get attached anyway because you're carrying a life.
Of course.
For 9 months.
Of course. There are people who say, look, this is a kind of child trafficking.
In a way.
In a way.
Yeah. Come on. It is exploitation, but I mean, yeah, most definitely it is. It's.
Mm-hmm. Let's see.
That's a very hard pill to swallow.
Because there are people
to be honest with you.
Because this is a business. If surrogacy for a lot of people is a business deal, you're paying this person, you're going to take 9 months off your job, you're going to exercise whatever, and give you free healthcare, but it's a business deal.
You're literally volunteering your life.
Well, yeah. So does the child have rights in this situation?
That's a good question.
And
that's a good question.
The problem is, like, these sorts of laws are not settled yet. Like, what happens if the parents who donated the sperm and egg, what if they get divorced or they change their minds? And this happens.
Yeah.
What if they said, you know what, I want a different child. The ultrasound showed this kid's a girl who wanted a boy. Not a problem. So
that's
what's going to happen here?
Yeah.
So there were real cases where, in real life, recently there was an Australian couple in a surrogacy case. And the ultrasound baby had Down syndrome.
Oh, wow.
And so they decided...
So they wanted to abort?
They wanted to ban the child. Not a problem anymore. Deliver, abort, we don't care. They bounced. So as a result,
That's disgusting character and behavior. That's disgusting.
Yeah, it was. So as a result, this was a couple that went to Thailand. They had a surrogate in Thailand. So Thailand's like, okay, no more surrogacies. They're all banned.
Oh, now they're all banned?
In Thailand, yeah.
Right.
The problem is some of the international surrogacies is an issue.
Yeah.
In New Jersey...
Because like you said, it's a form of child trafficking, in a sense.
Yeah. It's like consensual child trafficking, but who consents?
Yeah.
In New Jersey, there was a recent case where a surrogacy was planned, but then the surrogate mother decides she wants to keep the child. She did not want to give the child up.
Oh.
So this was like, they do this for adoption cases also. People who are pregnant, well, I don't want the kid, we'll adopt, the new family's going to get it.
Right.
This was a surrogacy, so this was their sperm and egg. But the mother... She said, I don't want this anymore. I want to keep this baby.
Wow.
So now
it's a situation.
Now who's got custody? It was a custody case.
Who ended up winning?
So the parents sued New Jersey court said that, look, this contract you made, you can't do that. You can't have like a contract where you get paid to do this. And they said, no, the contract is violated. So it wound up becoming a custody battle. It wound up going to the intended parents because she's a better mother, they're better parents in the interest of the child. But it could not have been that. It could have been that, no, you're keeping this kid.
Right.
Because
that was kind of like almost like a proverbial roll of the dice.
It really could have been. So now it's a problem because not every state allows surrogacy deals. For the same reason, like unwanted pregnancy, they contact an adoption agency. I want this baby to go to adoption. I don't want this kid. I'm not going to abort the kid. So adoption agencies will find families. They meet them. Okay, when they're born, we'll take over from here. We'll sign all the papers and transfer custody. There are cases where the mother decides, I want to keep the kid after all. Or the couple decides, you know what, we're not really looking for, this wasn't the right one. Very famously, Steve Jobs. He was an unwanted pregnancy.
Wow.
His parents were two college students who got pregnant and didn't intend to. They found a couple who were going to take the baby. And then they found, when he was born, they found out, oh, he's a boy. They wanted a girl. And so the adopting parents walked away. It's not our deal.
Wow.
So the adoption agency scrambled, and they found a different couple to take over. The problem was his birth parents said, no, we're college students. We want whoever takes the baby has to promise that the baby's going to go to college. And the couple that took the baby said, we don't have that kind of money. We can't guarantee that. So they made an agreement that the child will go to college no matter what. Even if we have to borrow money, we'll make sure the baby goes to college when he turns 18. So Steve Jobs did go to college. The problem was his adopted parents were a lot poorer.
Wow.
And his real parents became successful later on. His father, his
biological
father owns a chain of restaurants in California. His mother, I believe, is a successful teacher somewhere.
Wow.
They tried to go back and find him, but the problem is, you get lost in the system. And there's a big question about adoption because, do you know the parents, their history, if the child?
I know they were sick when they found out that he was the owner of Apple.
He was a billionaire.
Yeah, I know they were sick.
So, yeah, Steve Jobs found out first who his dad was. He realized, I know who my dad is, but his dad was trying to contact like his missing son.
Right.
And
did they ever connect?
I don't believe they ever actually. Steve Jobs went to his restaurant and met him, but I don't believe, as far as I remember, his biological father did not know who it was. And
That's really sad.
That's
really sad.
Steve Jobs is a very torn person because when you are adopted, you feel like
you know that there's a void missing.
There's a void missing. Did they not want me? Did my parents not love me? What was
Right.
the reason?
Yeah.
He met his mother, and she was like, I really wanted to have you, but I had no money. And the problem was he also had a sister.
Because there's certain human connections that you can only acquire with people whom you're biologically related to.
Yeah.
Period.
Steve Jobs had a biological sister, I believe.
Wow.
And so the question is, if they put me for adoption but not my sister, what's that like?
Yeah.
So, in New York City, remember David Berkowitz, he's the famous Son of Sam serial killer. One of the reasons they say he snapped was because he found out that...
I didn't know the Son of Sam had children.
No, he was adopted.
The Son of Sam was adopted, or the guy was adopted?
The Son of Sam, the serial killer,
Right.
he was adopted.
Oh, okay.
And then eventually, now some say this is why he snapped, because he went and found his birth mother, and he met her, and it turned out that she had other kids, didn't adopt any of the other ones, just put him up for adoption by himself. And when they met, she didn't want to talk to him. And so that was one of the reasons that made him so hate people. They say I'm not a
Obviously,
psychiatrist,
yeah.
but there were some psychiatrists who said this is the reason he snapped.
I can see that happening from a behavioral scientific perspective, from a chaplaincy perspective.
Mm-hmm.
That type of alienation, that type of detachment, that can definitely potentially drive someone over the edge. Now, in terms of his criminality, nothing justifies his criminality.
No,
obviously.
nothing justifies serial killing random people in New York City. It's one of those things where, in 100 years from now, they're not going to remember you, they're not going to remember me in New York, but they're going to remember the Son of Sam.
Okay,
He's
someone
famous.
put a question. Why are you friends with this person? We can have a side conversation about that later.
Well,
Long story.
Trolls are trolls.
Right, a troll is a
You
troll.
hope they'll
Right.
learn something venison in.
Right.
Um,
So yeah, that's that those type of scenarios have a lot of depth to them because, like you said, that alienation, that detachment, that sense of being unwanted.
yeah.
Yeah, that can drive anyone over the edge. Not even necessarily them being a serial killer,
Right.
but even them giving up on life.
Right. Well, these are all part of a challenge. I mean, everyone's situation is different. I want to say I'm not shaming anyone who puts their kids up for adoption or adopts someone else or anything like that, or people have fertility issues. People have fertility problems. It really strains relationships. They feel like
It can break relationships. It often does.
Yes.
Yeah.
And people like, did God not want me to have kids? Is that the reason?
Right.
Am I something? Did I curse?
Or not with that person, or this, yeah.
So
Or some
many
people, they
reasons.
may take that as a quote unquote sign that, oh, I'm not supposed to be with that person.
Yeah.
People, and it happens all the
And,
time.
and at the same time, there are people who try to get pregnant multiple times and they have miscarriage after miscarriage.
Yeah.
It's difficult. So I'm sure you see those sorts of cases.
I know a brother, Muslim guy. I know a Muslim brother personally. His wife, they recently had a child, and they endured 2 miscarriages before they had their first child. That was serious. Yeah.
Oh, that's true. It's tough because I know if people ask me, when should I announce that I'm pregnant because I want to have a miscarriage. I want to have a miscarriage after I announce I'm pregnant. So
Well, Islamically, that's actually why we have the aqiqah, which is the Islamic version of a baby shower.
Yeah.
This is why we have that post-birth as opposed to before the baby is born. We have it after the baby is born because realistically, there's no human guarantee that a woman will be able to deliver full term. And you don't want to have a baby shower and then, may Allah forbid, he may decree or decide that you have a miscarriage.
yeah, historically,
You know what I'm
that's the
saying?
case. Historically, so many infants do not live till age 1.
Right.
So that's why people wait. And in still many countries, like parts of Africa and South Asia and places like that, that's still a thing.
I mean, even all 3 of the sons of Muhammad, peace be upon him, his sons, Ibrahim, Abdullah, and Al-Qasim, they all died basically from SIDS. They died from sudden infant death syndrome.
Wow.
I mean, obviously they didn't know that then, but we know it now because none of them lived past the age of 2.
Sure.
Yeah.
So, man, that's a tough one.
It's very
It really
tough.
is. Just to change gears for a second. So remember, natural surrogacy is when
Or biological surrogacy.
biological surrogacy is where the surrogate mother, you use her egg, and the guy, the intended father, uses his sperm.
Right,
So, if my wife can't get pregnant,
right.
can I do natural means with the surrogate mother?
Well, see, Islamically, that's why we're allowed to have more than one wife. Like, for example, in the case of Abraham, peace be upon him, his first wife, Sarah,
Yeah.
peace be upon her, she was at an age where she could no longer have children. So she had a slave, Hajar,
Yes.
peace be upon her, Hagar, and she gifted her to Abraham so that they can have children. Now, obviously, when she got pregnant, stuff hit the fan. So
Right.
this is mentioned in detail by the historians Al-Tabari, Al-Suyuti, Ibn Kathir, and the Quran, and in the Sunnah, the prophetic tradition, of the results of that happening. You know what I'm saying? And at which time Allah had commanded Abraham to abandon both Hajar and Ismail, Hagar and Ishmael, peace be upon them both, in what is now known as like the Valley of Mecca, the Hijaz. And that's where they found the well of Zamzam, and that's where Hajj started and all of these type of things.
Yeah.
But it was a result of that, because originally Hagar was donated to Abraham as like a surrogate
I see.
so that they can have children. But again, once Hagar got pregnant, Sarah obviously wasn't a happy camper.
Right.
So this created huge conflict.
I see.
So that by definition, Islamically, would be kind of sort of a form of surrogacy.
Sure.
So Islamically, as Muslim men, since we're allowed to have more than one wife, if you're married to a woman who can't have children, marry another wife.
Right. Yeah, the takeaway here is, yes, it's all consensual is the important point.
I mean, it would have to be.
It has to be. But not everyone realizes that people ask about polygamy in Islam all the time.
Polygyny,
People realize
right.
It's consensual and everything. If you have to ask your existing wife if you can marry another person, and she has to
Well,
agree.
Islamically, you're not obligated to ask your wife, can you marry another wife? It's from wisdom and it's from intelligence to inform your wife that you want to have another wife.
Right.
Because obviously you don't want someone to strangle you or shoot you in your sleep or hit you upside the head with a frying pan,
So
things like that. But it just in terms of the text, there's no obligation that a Muslim man is obligated to tell his wife that he's marrying multiple wives or another wife. He is supposed to tell her. He should tell her. So that way she doesn't think that he's cheating on her, those type of things.
I see. All right.
And to keep general islah, goodwill between the couple.
Makes sense. All right, let's see if we take some audience questions here.
I'm sure we got a lot of them. Potentially.
So, someone actually sent me a question. What if the woman can and the man cannot? She should suffer. So I believe that the idea is I'm assuming if the woman can get pregnant and the man is infertile, should she be the one to suffer?
No, she doesn't have to suffer. If children are that important to her, she can opt for a khula, a divorce request. In Islamic, for a person to be married to someone and they want children and the person's not able to have children, or if the person's unwilling to try to have children, that's a legitimate grievance. That's valid grounds to get a divorce.
Oh yeah,
Islamically, yeah.
All for legally, that's a ground
in terms of secular legality as well. But in terms of Islam, Islamically, if you're married to a person and they either can't have children or they don't want to have children, that's valid grounds for divorce. So you don't have to stay stuck in that situation.
Right.
If you're a woman and you're married to a man and he doesn't want to have children, get a divorce and marry someone who wants to have children. The same thing with the man. If you're married to a woman and she's giving you grief about marrying another wife, or she doesn't want to have children or doesn't want to try to have children or she can't have children, then that's valid grounds for divorce.
I see what you mean.
Now, that doesn't mean that you take a heartless posture and say, oh, to hell with you. No, you try to work things out as best as you can.
Right.
But some things are just not reconcilable. And if or when it gets to that point, then that's why Islamically divorce is allowable.
That makes sense. Because the alternatives are like seeing a sperm bank. I think Islamically that's really not be generally.
Islamically, holistically, that would be completely mahlul. I mean, that would be completely mahrum. That would be mahrum. That would be Islamically prohibited. It would not be something mahlul. It would not be something Islamically allowable. It would be something mahrum, Islamically prohibited, because it disrupts and it violates the sanctity of the preservation of our nasab, patrilineal genealogy.
I guess that makes sense because it's all a question of historically, lineage is a very important thing. What house did you come from? What clan or tribe? And you're right, this kind of disrupts that.
And for Islam specifically, one of the reasons why a nasab, patrilineal genealogy, is so important is to prevent things like incest.
Right.
That's one of the other reasons why it's so important.
I see what you mean.
Yeah. So the preservation of patrilineal genealogy is intrinsically important Islamically. This is why it's one of the maqasid of Sharīah. This is why it's one of the objectives of Islamic law.
I see. All right. Well, thank you. That makes a lot of sense. I want to see, we have some questions that we decided to ask the audience. The first one here is, would you ever volunteer yourself to be a
surrogate father or mother?
Right. So unfortunately, we're in trouble with our polling system right now, so just go reply in the comments. We go to see that.
Right. Yeah, definitely. Give your feedback. The feedback is very, very important.
Right.
Yeah, unfortunately, every time we put these questions up, we get problems.
Facebook Live is a little tricky that way.
Yeah, it's a little complicated.
Would you ever volunteer yourself to be a surrogate father or mother? Well, I would not be a surrogate. I would not be a surrogate father. I don't think I want to donate my sperm.
Exactly. Yeah. That's Islamically. That's definitely not something that I would do. Definitely not.
They pay for it. But no, that would not be for myself. Other people have different opinions. I know there are. I know some Muslim countries do have sperm banks. But
really?
Yeah, I don't quite know the.
I mean, honestly, I don't know why that surprises me. I really don't know why that surprises me. It just does. I shouldn't be surprised.
Yeah, that's a tough one.
That's very tough. Yeah.
Yeah, surrogacy is a tough one also. This kind of goes back to our previous episode about organ donations. Should we do it altruistically or should we pay for it? Because the reality is, if you count everyone thing being just altruistic, we're going to have a shortage and people are not going to get things done.
Right.
No one wants to get pregnant with someone else's baby as a favor to them.
Right. I mean, basically, they're taking that universal principle, there's no such thing as a free lunch type of thing.
There was a...
Because, I mean, realistically, it's kind of like we live in a world now, especially in our modern time, where everything costs something.
Oh, yeah.
Where either everything or everyone has a price for something.
There was a real case a couple of years ago. A politician was he told one of his staff that my wife and I can't get pregnant. He asked the secretary, "Do you want to be a surrogate for me?"
Oh
and she said, "No, I'm not going to do that." But now she knows you're going to fire me for saying no. I'm not going to have your baby. So she sued for sexual harassment.
No. What type of surrogacy was he looking for? That's the better question.
It was the weirdest thing because she sued for sexual harassment, and it really was sexual harassment.
Obviously, I mean, it seems pretty clear what type of surrogacy he wanted. He didn't want her eggs. He wanted her.
How does it even come up in conversation? We work together. Can you bear my child? Oh God.
Yeah.
It's a little too much there.
Yeah, that's kind of nutty, man. That's kind of nutty.
The next one. Would you ever adopt? I think like we talked before, a lot of people, like 1 out of 3 Americans said they've considered it.
Yeah.
They've seriously thought it over.
Adoption is definitely a noble thing.
I think so.
Definitely a noble thing. But again, going back to what I mentioned Islamically is that you have to make sure that as much as humanly possible, the identity of the biological father is known to the child.
Yeah.
That has to be known to the child.
Sure.
That's number one. Number two, you have to give that adoptive child the surname, the last name of their biological father.
That's an Islamic principle.
Yeah, that's an Islamic principle. Yeah.
Okay. Well, I guess that makes sense because if you think about it, foster care, we only hear bad stories. So if you
we hear a lot of bad stories.
To get someone out of foster care,
yeah,
that would be.
Yeah,
that's.
I mean, it's especially in New York City where we have ACS, Administration of Child Services. They're basically ICE without guns.
Yeah.
They just run up at people like they'll run up on your crib 2-3 o'clock in the morning,
right?
On an ACS visit. Like I know people that's literally happened to.
I believe it. ACS tries to put the kids with extended relatives, aunts, uncles, grandparents, if they can. But if they can't, they're in just foster care. Yeah. And like I said before, there's a wait list for foster care where kids are in it for at least 2 years or more.
Yeah.
So it's
like you say, if you don't get adopted, you just become a ward of the state. You just get funneled into the system. You just fall through the cracks.
Because I think most adoptions really are babies. People want to adopt babies. People don't want to adopt 12-year-olds.
Right.
For many reasons, it's just harder. So
yeah. I mean, a lot of people, they operate on a mythos of being able to mold a person the way they want. Like a 12-year-old, there's not really much molding that you're going to do realistically.
Yeah.
So that type of thing.
That makes sense for a lot of people. I mean, a lot of Americans, when they want to adopt, they want the kid to have their name. They want to teach them the way they want to teach them.
Right.
They're complicated families. I don't have. I guess I'm one of those few families that doesn't have a lot of adopted experience. I have some cousins I think who are, but no one in my nuclear immediate siblings. Sort of family.
Even when you mentioned about foster care, it's like foster care and adoption, in principle, they're two sides of the same coin. Yeah. But legally, from what I understand, they're significantly different.
I see.
Like being a foster parent versus being an adoptive parent, I think. In terms of secular legality, there's very clearly defined differences between being a foster parent versus being an adoptive parent.
An adoptive parent is generally tend to be a permanent guardian.
Like the legal guardian, like the permanent legal guardian. Yeah.
I think foster is understood to be, this is not forever.
Right.
And people have short-term and long-term foster care.
It happens all the time.
It happens
all the time.
All the time.
Yeah.
All right. The last question I have here is, would you allow your surrogate adoptive child seek out the identity and whereabouts of their biological parents? Well, so that's a hard question, because this is a thing where I guess it comes with a further question. If you were adopted, would you, if you adopted a baby, how old would you wait before you told them they're adopted?
That's a good question.
I don't know the answer.
That's a good question. That would be something that the parents would have to make a decision themselves.
Yeah.
And I mean, I don't know, man. That's a very sticky situation because, again, you have an obligation to know who your biological parents are, specifically your biological father. Because again, going back to the principle of preservation of patrilineal genealogy, and for someone to keep that from you, that's a very sadistic. That's a very how should I say? That's a very sadistic posture.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? That,
I understand that. It's this is like a parent circles will have a discussion about like, you know, parent mommy time, like when should I tell my kid?
Right.
Because it's a hard one. You want to tell them sort of, I guess, younger, because it's not a stigma attached to it.
Right.
You know?
No, but like you said, a person may be like, okay, well, you've raised me my whole damn life. Why were my biological parents not there? Like, what happened? You know? But what if you have absolutely no idea, but they expect you to know? And if you don't know, they may have resentment towards you because they may think that you're lying. They may think that you're being dishonest, that you're keeping things from them. Or what if you do know the reason why they either gave up their child for adoption or just abandoned them? Yeah. It's like, do you feel comfortable telling your adoptive child, whether you're related to them or not, do you feel comfortable, or do you feel that you're in a position, or whether you even feel that you're entitled or justified to tell that adoptive child the reasons why or how they got put up for adoption, or they got abandoned, or whatever the case may be?
Absolutely, because now I'm thinking about it now. There are certain situations where it's not a secret. Where like if you adopt a baby of a different race, they'll probably tell the baby very early on, you know, you were adopted.
But you'd be surprised how many people would not do that.
Really?
You'd be surprised.
You know, now that all these DNA tests are out and all these other things, there's a lot of adults who discover that they were adopted, or that their father was not their real father.
Right. And that's heartbreaking.
That is heartbreaking. And I'm sure there are parents who are like, I didn't want to tell them, I didn't want to hurt, so just go delay, but they're going to find out eventually. You have an obligation to tell them.
Yeah. I remember I was watching a video about a guy, his wife, before he got married, he was sexually involved with a female, and they ended up breaking up, and he ended up getting married. And the woman who he had a previous relationship with wrote him a letter saying that, yo, I think you're the father of my child. The wife hid the letter. Oh. And he didn't find out about the letter until after his wife died. He discovered the letter. As Allah would have it, ironically, he was able to locate the son.
Yeah.
But ironically, that wasn't even his biological child. But they still bonded and they still connected.
Oh, wow.
So it's kind of like he indirectly still adopted this guy as his son. But things like that happen all the time.
Wow, I didn't expect that.
Yeah, it's just a whole. It's like at every turn of that story was a complete like detour and irony. Yeah, but that's real life. Things like that's reality. Things like that happen all the time.
Life is a lot more complicated than we think.
And we make life more complicated than it has to be. I mean, life doesn't have to be complicated. Life is complex. We make it complicated.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? So. Yeah.
Definitely. So I think we go over a lot of different things here. Adoption is a difficult topic in itself, and then surrogacy on top of that.
It's ultra sensitive.
Very.
It's super sensitive.
Sure.
It's very, very sensitive. Yeah.
Because it really, people get really, people's lineage, people's idea that I'm going to have my offspring, it really has a lot of pull for people.
Yeah. And then even people watching this, Allah knows best, we probably have people watching this who are adoptive parents. And I'm sure whether they're Muslim or not, they're going to feel ways about what we discussed.
Yes.
Regardless whether they agree or disagree with it. It's going to churn something in them.
Oh, yeah. Oh,
definitely.
Most of them. My cousin's going to kill me because I forgot that they were adopted. So this is all going to come back and bite me later, I'm sure. Oh, my. So, if there's any questions, feel free to post it into the comments section. We're going to keep this up. We could always.
Yeah, we're definitely going to keep it up. Yeah.
So, that about does it for today's episode. We'll leave it at this.
Yeah. So we'll see you in 2 weeks.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Gareth.
Thank you, James. I will.
So if you have any questions or comments about today's episode, please message us on our Facebook page.
Yeah. So please follow the Facebook page, like it, share it. If you like the episode, share the episode. If you like the page, like the page. Yeah. We're on Instagram as well.
Mm-hmm. Help new listeners discover the show by please sharing it. Right. If you have any questions for future topics, please leave a post on our Facebook.
If you would like to suggest a future topic, a future biomedical ethic topic, we're definitely open to that. If you think that there's something we should biomedically and or Islamically cover, if you think that it's a good topic pertaining to Al-Islam and biomedical ethics that would be like a good crossover, please present that subject to us, and we'll try our best to present that as positively, as objectively as possible.
Thank you. We'll be off next week. We'll see you in 2 weeks.
All right.
Take care, folks.
All right.
All right.